So if you talk to an Arizonan about weather, especially now in the summertime, you're probably not going to hear a lot of cheering, a lot of encouragement. You're probably going to hear some complaining, some frustration, maybe even a longing to live somewhere else. But when it comes to weather, that's pretty much all we can do with it, right? We can complain about it. We can't do anything about it, really. And in fact, if you Google worst natural disasters, you'll see that we are helpless in the face of weather. It is totally above us. It's totally beyond us. It's completely out of our control. If we think through, some of the most devastating storms to hit, the most recent one for us is Hurricane Katrina. You remember this? Many of us were riveted to our TVs in August of 2005 as this devastation was just catastrophic. 1,836 people lost their lives. The estimated damage of Hurricane Katrina was somewhere between 80 and 100 billion with a B dollars. Western Europe had a heat wave. No, a heat wave is called summer here. But back there, they had a heat wave in 2003 and causing the deaths of over 37,000 people. France lost 15,000 alone in this heat wave in 2003. In 2008, a hurricane hits Myanmar and 84,000 people died. That's nothing compared to a hurricane that hit Bangladesh in 1970. In that hurricane, listen to this, 500,000 people died. That's equivalent of 1 out of every 3 people who live in the city of Phoenix. 500,000. And that's nothing. The worst natural disaster in the 20th century happened in August 1931. It happened in China. The Yangtze River swelled because of torrential rains, and as a result of that, 3.7 million people died. That is equal to half the population of the entire state of Arizona. More than out of control. Weather can just be downright terrifying. Which brings us to Mark 4, a very familiar passage about Jesus in a storm. And before we jump into it, I just want to pull you back and just give you kind of the context, what's been going on. If you look at the opening words of verse 35, it says that on that day, meaning the day that was talked about before. So this was a long day of ministry for Jesus. He had been preaching to the crowds. He talked about that parable of the soils, and then the people didn't understand that, and then he brings his disciples together, has a private briefing with them to say, okay, here's what was going on. So he's exhausted. That's why he's sleeping in the boat in the midst of this storm. He's exhausted. He's completely tired, spent from ministry. And he wants to travel from Capernaum, which is over here. He wants to travel from Capernaum over to this area, to Gergesa. And so that's about a 6-mile trip. It should take about 2 to 3 hours. So for people who live in this region, this storm is not surprising. This still happens today. Regularly, it can go from calm to out of control in a matter of minutes. So this sea here, this lake, the Sea of Galilee, it's about 700 feet below sea level. It's formed by snowmelt from a mountain nearby called Mount Hermon, and it fills up this lake, and it's about 10,000 feet above sea level. So the Sea of Galilee on the shore, some of it is bordered by these cliffs. And so here's what happens. I'm not a scientist, and so, take this with a grain of salt. My degree's in the Bible. But in reading people who are describing this, who know this stuff, this is what they said, basically. You've got this cold air on Mount Hermon, and gravity pulls that air down, and as it pulls that air down, it enters these cliffs. And when it enters these cliffs, it creates wind, and it picks up speed, and as it comes out of those cliffs, it hits the warm air on the Sea of Galilee, which causes these massive storms. A storm like this would not have been new to many of Jesus' early followers. They were fishermen, and so this would have been normal for them. This would have been something they grew up with because they grew up on this lake. None of this is going to be a surprise to Jesus either, as we're going to see. So what we're going to learn, basically, is that as we look at this passage, followers of Jesus are not exempt from trials. You can be a subject of his kingdom. You can be a Christian. You can be born again. And it doesn't guarantee any of us an easy life. And so me saying that, you might be like, oh yeah, well, I know that. But if you watch Christian television, if you listen to Christian music and everything is airy, fairy, like floating on a sea of marshmallows and everything's puppy dogs and ice cream, then when trials hit, you might think like, why is this happening to me? God, what are you doing? I don't understand this. This is not the way it's supposed to be. People tell me if I just have enough faith, I'm never going to go through any trials. I'm always going to have a full bank account. I'm never going to stub my toe. I'm never going to get in a car accident, and everybody's going to love me. So why isn't this happening? So we when trials hit our lives, we often ask, why? Why is this happening? What are you doing? And that's what this passage is in the Bible to tell us. It's here to help us discover, what is God doing in our trials? Why do we go through trials in the first place? What is he doing? We're going to put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples, and we're going to say, okay, if that was us, what is it that Jesus wanted us to know if we were one of them? Because we are a disciple, and so he wants us to know these things too. As a Christian, let me just start by saying this. You cannot think it strange that God deeply, deeply loves you, and you go through hard times. You go through pain and loss and disappointments and trauma and death this side of heaven. Jesus never promised ease in this life. We know this passage, right? Jesus speaking. In this world, you will have tribulation. It's going to happen. It's a promise. He says, you and I, we will have tribulation. But take heart, I've overcome the world. All the things that cause you tribulation, I've overcome them. So they can never take you down. They can never destroy you because I overcame them. And if that's true, and the Bible as well as our experience tells us this is true, then we need help responding when the hurricanes of life hit us in the face. I'm not just talking about big things like the death of loved ones or divorce or the loss of a job or life-threatening illness. I mean, all of that's true, but I'm even talking about the small stuff, like the life that you dreamed you would have in this moment. 20 years ago, you're looking on, this is where I want my life to be, and it's not that right now. This passage can speak to that. The relationship that you hoped you would have with your spouse or some friend or family member, it's not that way. This passage can help with that. The unexpected accident or diagnosis that drains your bank account, this passage can speak to that. The unexpected job change that moves you from family and friends and puts you in a new place around people that aren't familiar, around a place that's not familiar. Maybe the persistent, stubborn turmoil of bad choices that happened years ago, but they don't seem to go away. This passage can help with that. In our trials, we often wonder, like I said, God, what are you doing? Let's take a look at verse 35 and find out what he is doing. So let's take a look at that again, verse 35, and notice what he says. Jesus speaking to his disciples, let us go across to the other side. Think about those words. Why were they on the lake when the storm hit? Why were they there? They were there because Jesus put them there. He had a wonderful plan for their lives. I don't see coincidence in these words. Jesus put them on the lake in the boat at just the right time to be hit by this storm. He knew exactly what he was doing when he said, let us go to the other side. He knew he was taking them onto the lake. He knew he was putting them in the path of that life-threatening storm. And this is more than just, God is in control when trials hit. Jesus planned this trial for them when he said, let us go to the other side. So we want to know what God is doing in our trials. And then we've got to embrace this very hard truth. Point number one, you and I have to admit, we have to realize God's planning your trials. Realize God is planning your trials. That statement shocking? It will be shocking if pop psychology, Christian television, Christian music, or your own wisdom informs your view of God more than the Bible does. Now, God is not the author of evil, so don't think that. But Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11 says, God works out everything. God is working everything. All things, even our trials, in conformity to his will. He's working, he's doing, he's active. I did a whole message on this verse last year, spent an entire 45 minutes just breaking down those 9 words, 10 words. And so you can go back and look at that and see just how intricately and how intimately God is involved in what happens in our lives. You can go to our website, it's in the series Truths That Transform. But I just want you to hear that. I just want you to see this. God's not just in control when life is out of control. He planned it. I mean, you really don't think that God is shocked when bad things happen in our lives, right? Like he's looking at it going, oh my goodness. Or like he's scrambling to catch up, like, oh my, I got to figure out what to do here. Look what's happening to little Johnny over there. Things are falling apart. Oh, what am I going to do? Like, you don't really think he's doing that, right? Talking to Christians, notice what Paul says. These people were going through terrible persecution and affliction in the church in Thessalonica. And look at these words, writing to these persecuted Christians. He writes that no one be moved by these afflictions, moved to depression, moved to despair. Don't want that to happen. Why? For you yourselves know that we are what? Destined for this. This is what God wanted. This is what God was doing. This was how God was working. Now, it may be like Jonah. His storm was because of his sin. Or maybe like these disciples, their storm came because they were being obedient to Jesus' words, let's go to the other side. Either way, do you see God planning your trials? In the car accident, in the job change, in the loss of a child, in the diagnosis, in the broken dreams, in the betrayal, in the hurt feelings, in that hostile coworker. These men were in the service of God. They were next to Jesus 24/7, and it did not exempt them from trials because he planned these trials for them, this trial for them. We're going to see why he did that in a moment. But does this give perspective? Does this give help as you think about the trials that you faced in your past? Does it help put an understanding around what happened as you think about horrible things that have happened in your past and say, okay, God was doing something with this rather than God sneezed in this moment or, God took a vacation while I got in that car accident or he looked the other way or he doesn't really care or he doesn't exist. Perspective is what we need when trials hit, and this becomes a foundational perspective that all of us need in order to really grasp, okay, what is God doing? When we asking that question, why? God, why are you doing this? We can come back and say, God, you planned this, and you know what you're doing, and you have a reason, and you love me. What is that? And we're going to see what that is in a minute, but we just have to start in this place. Say, okay, God, you planned this. What are you doing? Now let's see what else God is doing. Look at verse 36. Verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling, but he was in the stern asleep on the cushion. Well, here the storm hits. Jesus' followers we're going to see are in utter despair. Circumstances are beyond their control. Circumstances are beyond their wisdom. Circumstances are beyond their experience. They do not know what to do. They are helpless. Matthew describes this storm with the word seismos, which we get the word seismic from. This is a huge storm. It's shaking the valley. It is the valley where this lake is. It's like an earthquake on the sea there. It's violent. The wind is howling. The waves are crashing. Lightning is flashing all over the place. Thunder is cracking. Like, this is horrible. And these guys you got to just picture them. They're exhausted. They're all wet. Their eyes are blurry from water. Their arms are working to the point of exhaustion. They're slipping all over the boat. They are freaking out. Pandemonium is breaking out, and they wake up Jesus. The storm couldn't wake them up, but they wake him up, and they're freaking out. And notice verse 38. They rebuke him. Look at verse 38. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Think about the slam that is on Jesus. You don't even care about us. Are you even worried about what's going on here? Do you not care? Are you not concerned about us? Sound familiar? The storm on the outside was similar to the storm on the inside of these men, and it must have been bad. Think about it. Here are seasoned fishermen turning to a carpenter for help. And going like, hey, help us out here on this boat that we're experts in. This physical storm caused a psychological storm, and they're helpless, chaotic. They don't know why he seems so indifferent. They don't know why he seems checked out. They don't know how he could sleep when all of this is happening to them. Teacher, don't you care? They're criticizing him. If you care, you'd help. If you care, you'd save. You'd put your hands together and start bailing water or something. Please help. Nothing. We're dying. Yeah, nothing. Notice verse 35. What I want you to see in this is that they're able to talk to Jesus in the midst of this. Verse 35, it doesn't say, hey, take the boat to the other side and I'll meet you there. Remember, he got in the boat. He was with them in the boat that he planned to take into the storm. He knew wave after wave was going to be crashing over them, and it'd get close to sinking them. It'd be filling with water. But look, verse 35, what's the next word? Us. Let us go across the other side. So if we're going to discover what God is doing in our trials, then point number 2, know this. Know God is present in your trials. Know God is present in your trials. In other words, it is very important to see that Jesus wasn't somewhere else. Jesus was right there in the boat with them. He didn't stay on the shore and show up later like, hey, everybody, oh, you guys having problems? Oh, I'll take care of that now. He is right there every second, every minute, and he's with you too. After his resurrection, he promises, Matthew 28:20, I am with you some of the time. That's what your Bible says. I'm with you always. To the very end of the age always includes every trial we have ever faced. The greatest storms we're going to face in this life are not going to be outside of us. They're going to be inside of us, in our hearts, just like the real storm for these men was inside their hearts. Like them, we think trials mean that God abandons us, but he is always with us. Like them, we think trials are proof that God doesn't care about us. Don't you see? Don't you care? But he is always with us. Like them, we think in those moments when trials hit, we have the right to rebuke him and say, you are not doing things correctly. But he is with us always. We can either trust our sinful thoughts and ignore God's truth, or we can fight our sinful thoughts with faith. It's something like this. In those moments, we can say, like the disciples on the Sea of Galilee, he is always and will forever be with me. He is with me always. I can trust him. A couple of weeks ago, I read about did you see this story? 5 Florida teenagers who were thrown in jail after watching a handicapped man die in a pond. They were sitting on the shore, videotaping their mockery of him as he's flailing and asking for help, and he drowns right in front of them and no help, and they get thrown in jail. Now here's the thing. Those 5 teens are not a picture of God when you went through that horrible time in your life. It is not a picture of him now, sitting there watching you flailing, going, stinks for you. Yeah, why don't you pray a little more? If you prayed a little more, or if you gave a little more, everything would be better. But this is your fault. God, this is not a picture of the God of the Bible, right? Our God is not like that. Why? We complain like he is in the midst of trials. We look at him and go, don't you care about me? Like those kids did not give a rip about that poor man. But does God have that kind of character that says you can't trust him when your circumstances lie by telling you that he walked away when he really didn't? Can you really trust him no further than your circumstances? God has never stood back and watched and done nothing while we were going through hard times. He was right there with you in it, just like he was in that boat and has always been and always will be to the end. And here's what some of us need to do. We need to take that truth into a specific moment in the past. When it feels like when we thought in those moments he was not there, when we think that there's a void, some kind of chasm, a vacuum where God should have been, but because of the way we responded, we're not responding like he really was. And we need to take these truths, we need to take this image of Jesus in the boat with them in their trial, we need to take that and put it into that trial. We need to put it into that source of pain in the past. Can you go back in your mind and instead of picturing a void or an emptiness where God should have been, can you picture him in that place? Can you picture him in that place now if the trial is today? Here's what Jesus said, John 14. He says, I'm going to ask the Father, And he's going to give you another counselor, and he's going to be with you how long? How long? Forever. He's going to be with you forever. He's the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. If you've given your life to Jesus, if he is the Lord of your life, if he is the Savior of your soul, if you are trusting him to bring you to heaven and not yourself, then there's never been 1 second of your life that he hasn't been with you. You have never been alone. You will never be abandoned. You will never be without him. I mean, do you think that the Father heard this request from Jesus and said, nah, we're going to give Christians, we're just going to give you the Spirit for a little while. We're going to give my tangible presence with you. We're just going to give you him for just a little bit. Look at that word forever. That's permanent presence in our lives. And think about it too. If Jesus faced the storm of leaving heaven to come here, if he faced the storm of being a toddler and a teenager, if he faced the storm of being rejected, if he faced the storm of crucifixion, if he faced the storm of torture, if he did all of that, including facing the storm of God's wrath, if he did that because he loves you, would he really abandon you now or in your trials? He has never left you. He's never been indifferent about your suffering. He was there. He is there now. Now look back at Mark 4. Look at verse 39. He was not indifferent to their suffering. He is not indifferent to our suffering. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Jesus responds to their request with 2 powerful words: quiet and still. So these gale force winds, these extreme waves, they recognize the voice of Jesus and they obey. The sea becomes instant glass, the wind blows away, and it's completely calm. Well, technically, wind and waves aren't alive, so they don't obey. But here's how it works. Colossians 1 says that Jesus holds everything together. So in that moment, Jesus speaks and he causes all the molecules to do exactly what he wanted them to do. Instantly done. Storm over. In verse 36, you might be wondering about those other boats. Those other boats are critical because they're there. We don't know who they are or like why are they there? We don't know ultimately why they were there. Like what was the thing that got them onto the boat or onto the sea? But what we do know is that they become important because they're eyewitnesses to this miracle. Mark isn't saying, hey, it was just this group of Jesus followers and no one else. He's saying there were eyewitnesses to this. Multiple people, other boats, plural, saw this, experienced this. So think about it. Takes them out there, puts them in the middle of the storm that he thought would kill them, and at just the right moment, at just the right time, Jesus stands up, says his words, and everything disappears. All the pandemonium, all the fear of death, all of their hearts being exposed so that they're showing they don't really trust him, all of that, he allows to happen. And in the very moment he plans, he stands up, shuts it down. So what was his purpose? What was he doing? Why did he do that? We would like the story to read like this. Hey, let's go to the other side. But hey, there's going to be a storm in a couple hours. So instead of taking the boat on the sea, I'm just going to float us on a cloud of butterflies over the storm. We're going to look at it from the top and go, oh, look at what we're not experiencing because everything is puppy dogs and ice cream when you follow Jesus. We're just going to land on the other side where there's going to be chocolate, there's going to be wonderful things there, and then, we're going to go on. That's what we want it to read, but thank God it doesn't read that because that'd be fairyland. That wouldn't be reality, and what we're dealing with here is reality. Think about these men. None of them had withered hands. None of them had deathly illnesses. None of them were demon-possessed. They really hadn't needed Jesus yet, like other people had in the book of Mark. And so here we see their need for him. But Jesus asked them, notice that, why are you so afraid? That statement searches their souls. It goes right past their fear into their very hearts to show them that your commitment to me is really not all you think it is. In other words, this event is meant to teach them a lesson, much like our trials are meant to teach us lessons. It exposes their hearts, much like trials expose our hearts, and show us we need to grow, we need to develop. And that's really what trials are all about. I mean, take a look at James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. I mean, we know this passage. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials. Probably like the hardest verse in the Bible to obey. You know, like, oh, I'm so grateful I just got in a car accident. So grateful I just got fired. Pure joy, you know, that I just got that diagnosis. I'm just so grateful and joyful. Like, hardest passage. There's no way we're going to obey that passage apart from God's Spirit working in us and our desire to follow him. It's never going to happen. But notice this. Count it pure joy, face various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Trials develop us. They deepen us. They teach us. One author put it this way, Christian quote, he says, "We must count it no strange thing if we have to endure sickness, losses, bereavements, and disappointments, just like other men." He says, "Free pardon and full forgiveness, grace by the way, glory at the end. All this our Savior has promised to give, but he has never promised that we shall have no afflictions." And then listen to this. He loves us too much to promise that. He loves us too much to promise no afflictions. He says, by affliction, he teaches us many precious lessons, which without the trial we never would have known. God loves us too much to keep us from trials, and he brings them our way to deepen us, to teach us lessons we'd never learn if we didn't go through the trial. So if we're going to discover what is God doing on our trials, then point number 3, we need to learn God's lessons from our trials. Learn God's lessons from your trials. There are primarily 2 lessons in this passage that these disciples needed and that you and I need. What they learn is what we need to learn when it comes to our trials. And so let's take a look at those. The first is this. This trial was meant to teach that though Jesus is fully human, like he's sleeping, right? He needs to sleep, he's exhausted. Though he is fully human, Jesus is fully God. That's the first lesson they need to learn. They probably expected him, when they came to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, don't you care that we're perishing?" They probably expected that he would like grab the sail and help them with it or start bailing water. You know, that's probably what they expected him to do. But what does he do? He gives them a solution that traumatizes them. They learn something about Jesus when he calmed the storm. Verse 31, verse 40 says, "Why are you afraid?" But notice verse 41. It says in verse 41 that they were afraid with great fear. And the suggestion there between those 2 words means that they were more afraid after the storm than before it was calmed. And when they said, "Who then is this?" it's not like they didn't know who he was. It's not like they're like, "Oh, who is this guy?" What they're saying is this. This is a statement of amazement at what the miracle that they just saw implied about who Jesus really is. Because what happens in that moment should have been an echo of something that they'd read about in there when they were in Saturday school, when they were studying the Bible. Because Jesus speaks, and it was so. He spoke, and it happened. Just like what other part of the Bible? Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1. God spoke, and it was so. His authority was so clear, the truth it revealed meant that they were face to face with God. Jesus does something in this moment that only God could do, not angels, not mere humans, something only God could do. And when they realized that the God of the universe was actually in their boat, they were terrified. More terrifying than a life-threatening storm outside your boat is having God in your boat. And they were better able to handle the possibility of death and the possibility of the presence of God among them. So in this moment, God's presence in Jesus was not reassuring. It wasn't something that calmed them. It was something that freaked them out. Is that weird to think about? Because we picture Jesus, tossing kids in the air, petting lambs as his perm is like flowing in the wind, right? Like that's how we picture him. And he is caring and he is tender. He is gracious and all of those things, no doubt. But to truly know him rightly is to fear him. I mean, without fearing him, his grace and his tenderness just seems like sentimentality. It just seems like, oh, I love you, but you don't really love me back. No, to have the God of the universe be tender to you and kind with you after how many times you have given him the middle finger with your life is something that should blow your mind, something should blow my mind. And here he is. Here they see Jesus for who he really is as God, and they are freaking out. They need to know this. And we need to learn this lesson too, that Jesus is God, because in our trials, if we don't really grasp this, then this is what our trials are going to be like. They're going to be like this. And for many religious people, this is what it is like. Jesus is the junior partner. He's the vice president. So when we hit trials and we're committed to Jesus and trials hit our lives, then, hopefully Jesus is having a good day with the big man upstairs because, maybe that's why my trial is happening, because my junior partner isn't looking out for me. And so he's just somehow messing up. And so that is, Jesus is no junior partner. He's no vice president. He is God, which means that he is watching you, guarding you. All of these things about God that we've been looking at in this passage are about him. He's no junior partner that, maybe might be having a good day with God the Father so that, I'll be taken care of. He is God. And second, this event is meant to expose the lack of faith that Jesus knew was already in their hearts. Jesus exposes this. I want you to think about this. Look back at verse 35. It says, "Let us go to the other side." Jesus said it. That settles it. There should not have been any question in their minds in that moment. In the midst of that trial, though, they stopped believing his word and believed their circumstances instead. They might be drenched, they might be exhausted, they might be terrified, but his word is true. Regardless of the storm, regardless of the terror, they will make it to the other side because he said they would make it to the other side. They stopped believing that. And notice that word in verse 40, that word still. Do you still not believe? That is such a kind way for Jesus to rebuke them. He's not, levitating himself and all fire in his eyes and how could you not trust me? He just asks a kind question. After everything you've seen, after everything you've experienced, after everything I've done in your life, still not trust me? Oh, they believed in him for eternal life. No doubt about that. Mark chapter 1. They believed in him for eternal life. They just didn't believe in him for everyday life. Everyday life, I'm not there yet. And the trials do the same thing for us, right? He summons them onto the lake. He summons the storm to the lake, and he does it for their good, just like Romans 8:28, right? It's like Christian coffee mug verse, I know, but if you don't have this verse memorized, if you don't check every year just to make sure this verse is in the Bible, this is one of those verses that you just need to hold on to all the time, that we know, not guess, hope, or wish. We know that in all things, our trials, our pains, our disappointments, God works for the good of those who love him. And in moments of trial, we can either believe that truth or we can believe our feelings. And we have that inner lawyer that screams at us, you can't trust him. Look at what's going on. You can't trust him. And God's word says, yes, you can. I told them they would get to the other side, and they got to the other side. I told you all things work together. I'm working all things together for your good. You can trust that. One author put it this way, quote, "If our distresses grow to such a height as almost to overwhelm us, let us believe that God does it with our good in mind. When the apostles were covered by the waves, their weakness, which formerly lay concealed, was discovered." God is working all these trials in us to develop us, to deepen us, to teach us. And it's never nice. It's never painless. And the question for us is, do we trust that in the worst moments that we've experienced in our lives. I remember one of the worst experiences for me was when my grandpa died in 2007. I was traumatized. Like I was questioning God. I was angry at God. I was questioning Christianity. I was questioning everything. Like I was just going after him. I couldn't believe that this would happen. I was holed up in my room for almost 2 weeks, just wrestling and wrestling and wrestling with him. At the end of that, I looked back on that week and realized, like, oh yeah, like you're so great, seminary student, blah, blah, blah. You're not as strong as you thought you were. I'm not as strong as I thought I was. Just like those disciples, my heart in that trial was exposed, and I needed to repent, and I needed to ask him for grace because he wasn't that wonderful, and he wasn't that satisfying, and he wasn't as incredible as I would say that he was. That trial exposed my heart. And we know God has reasons for our trials. We know that he has lessons, and often we know what those lessons are, right? We know that if that this trial has come into my life because it exposes my sin and makes me hate it more. We know that a trial comes into our life to shatter an idol, maybe a person or something that we're putting more trust in and more hope in and finding more joy in than God. Or maybe it's like these disciples. The trial comes into our lives to show us we don't really trust him like we think we do. And God gently, just like Jesus, goes, do you still not trust me? So when trials strike your life, whether it's with your spouse or your kids or your in-laws, maybe you hate where you live and it just grates on you. Maybe this life isn't the life that you expected. Maybe you're facing a diagnosis that you don't understand, or a job loss, or something just truly devastating is taking place right now. We see in this passage, we see from this passage that God has graciously given us this passage to say, hey, trust me, I've planned this. Hey, trust that I'm present with you in this, and trust that I'm teaching you lessons that about me, and lessons about you that never would have happened if this trial didn't come in your life. And do this especially when you don't see him, when you don't feel him, when your sinful heart tells you he can't be trusted, when your friends, maybe you're like Job's friends and are like, yeah, you shouldn't trust him. He is, how can you believe in God? Look at what's happening. Trust him anyway. We've heard this expression, behind your frowning circumstances, he hides a smiling face. Ever heard that before? Behind frowning circumstances that would make you frown, make you sad, make you depressed. Behind frowning circumstances, he hides a smiling face. The storms, the clouds of our trials are trying to obscure his love for you. Don't let them. The greatest danger for these disciples was not the storm that threatened to kill them. It was the unbelief that threatened their wavering hearts. And the same is true for you, and the same is true for me every time we hit a trial. It is this one question: am I holding on to his character as such that his character is a more dominant thought for me than my feelings and my circumstances right now? And I just want you to remember this. Every time you see the Superstition Mountains, I want you to remember this, that those mountains are like newborn babies compared to how long he has loved you. Let that sink in. Those mountains are like newborn babies compared to how long he has loved you. If all that Jesus has done, if all that Jesus did to save you, if that doesn't convince you of his love, even in our trials, then what else could he do? Can we not trust him now and in the future after all that he's done for us? Let me end with these wise words from Charles Spurgeon. He is one of the greatest preachers of all time. If you don't know him, you should Google him, get to know him. He's incredible. I just want to end with these words because this kind of captures the idea of all that God is doing in the midst of our trials. But he starts with an image from John 15, where Jesus says that the branches that bear fruit, he prunes so that they bring more fruit. So the branches, Jesus says, he's using this imagery of of grapes and branches and all of those things, and saying, okay, if God wants to do things in your life, he wants to get the best return from you, if he wants to do the most in you, well, he prunes you. He cuts you. Well, listen to what Spurgeon says. Did Jesus say the branches that bring forth no fruit shall be pruned? No, he says branches that bear no fruit shall be utterly taken away in due season and cast into the fire. But it is written, every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it that it may bring forth more fruit. The gold is put into the furnace because it is gold. It would have been of no use to put mere stones and rubbish there. The corn is threshed because it is corn. Had it been weeds, it would have been tossed into the fire. The great owner of heaven's jewels thinks it worthwhile to use a more elaborate and sharp cutting machine upon the most valuable stones. A diamond of the first order is sure to undergo more cutting than an inferior one. And that's because the king desires that it may have many facets, which may throughout eternity with greater splendor reflect the light of the glory of his name. In other words, the better diamonds get cut more, so that as they are cut, they shine brighter and show just how wonderful the Maker is. Let's pray. Jesus, you conquered this storm to show your disciples that you are God. And as a result of that, they can trust you that you're planning these things, that they can trust you that you're with them, they can trust you that you are teaching them something, and that is the same message for us. Jesus, we need your help in this because we are weak, we are frail, we do not do this perfectly. In fact, we do it very imperfectly. We often waver back and forth between fear and faith. We often waver back and forth between doubting and trusting our circumstances versus trusting you and your word. We begin to let our circumstances interpret your character rather than allowing your word to do that for our hearts. So Jesus, we can't do this without you. We need your help. So will you do this in us, please? Will you help us? If we're facing a trial now that's been going on for a long time, something that just started, or use it to prepare us for what's coming. We need you for that. So will you please do that in us and for us, and will you help us be a blessing to others with these truths that you taught us today. In your name, amen.